I'm very, very interested. I'm also not an interviewer, so don't
Yeah.
expect like that kind of professional demeanor because I don't know how to do that.
Okay, so I'm just going
We're
to
just
roll.
friends.
We're just going to roll, and then we
Okay.
can cut whatever you don't want in there, and that way,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Alrighty. Woo! I like it when it's windy. That's nice. So, hi, I'm Rebecca Burkett, and I'm here with my friend Ann Cummins.
Hi.
And we're here at the Tiki Bar Lounge. What do we call it, Sandy?
Tiki Hut.
We're at Sandy Dillman's Tiki Hut, right? Here in Flagstaff, Arizona, on a beautiful Saturday. You know, because that's what we do. That's what writers do. That's what we writers do, is we, you know,
Hang at the Tiki
hang
Hut.
at the Tiki Hut, have wine, and video each other.
And gaze at Sandra's treehouse,
I
which is
know.
right in our eye view there.
That's right. Next time we will be recording from the treehouse, I assure you. So we're here today on the auspicious occasion of honoring some interesting questions that some of my students down at ASU provided for Anne. Because I asked them to read 3 of her stories. She has 3 wonderful pieces of short fiction. She has actually quite a bit more of a body of work than that. She has a wonderful book of short stories called Red Ant House, and also a novel called Yellow Cake. And she has appeared in a number of really wonderful publications for, I mean, I hate to say this, but like a long time. Like many years.
Too long. Too long.
No, I get
Seems like just yesterday when it all started, but
well, I get to say that because Anne and I have in fact known one another for a good long time. We met. Well, Anne is actually was born in Durango, right?
Right.
And grew up in New Mexico.
right.
And lived actually in Shiprock or in the Shiprock area.
In Shiprock,
Mhm.
yes, in Shiprock.
Okay, which
Yeah.
actually we will find, you know, sort of figures into a lot of her work, as a lot of students have noticed. Anne and I attended, got our MFAs, our Masters of Fine Arts in Writing, at the U of A in the early 90s.
I got mine in 1989.
Oh, okay.
So you must have come in just a little bit after me,
Yeah,
I think.
right. I
Yeah.
think there was that overlap.
There's a little overlap.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And it was very exciting because Anne was actually teaching a class in fiction to my sister, my younger sister. And we had discovered, because my sister came home to announce that her teacher, Anne Cummins, had a story published in the New Yorker, and we all went, oh my God, because we all grew up with the New Yorker, adore that magazine. And in fact, the New Yorker archives, which are now available online, are what I have asked my students to read as their texts. So we read Shiprock Fair and Starburst and
Bitterwater, right?
Bitterwater.
Yeah.
I like better water. No,
little,
Bitterwater.
Little bitter water.
Sorry, I adore these stories, and so does everyone else. So anyway, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what it's like to start publishing in a place like the New Yorker, and how you know a young writer like yourself gets started, whenever they get started.
Well, it was just pure dumb luck for me with the New Yorker. Right place, right time. And I had only been writing for a few years. And as Becky said, I was in the MFA program at the University of Arizona when I got a call from Dan Menaker at the New Yorker that they wanted to publish my story.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's very different right now to publish in the New Yorker. As I understand, you can't just send your stories to that magazine. You have to have an agent send them, and it's gotten much more difficult. But I sent, you know, you always start out at the top. You send stories, and I had started with them. I'd got my master's degree at Johns Hopkins, and had started sending to the New Yorker the year before I went to Tucson, and happened to have Dan Menaker write me back liking my work. So, you know, continued to send work when I had something new, and I hit the jackpot with Bitterwater.
Right.
It's a funny story, though. He had originally read my story Starburst, and they had rejected it. So at that time, there was an editorial board at the New Yorker. They all had to like it and say yes. And so, I went to my workshop group in Tucson and said, "This is so cool. This story got close. They liked it, but no go. So what should I do?" And they gave me this great advice for revising Starburst, and I dug in and was tearing it apart and just really reworking the story. Meanwhile, I had sent Bitterwater to him, and he read it, and I got the acceptance for Bitterwater. And in the phone call, he said, "Oh yes, we want Bitterwater, but we also want Starburst." And he wanted the original story.
Oh.
So the story that I was revising based on all of my workshop, my
Input,
my
right?
colleagues, input. I just didn't. I just sent them Starburst. Yeah.
Wow.
So I got lucky, real
So
lucky.
stories about stories, we have them. We have them.
But I do think that right place, right time. I was, I came to writing fiction because of my unique experience growing up on the Navajo reservation.
Yeah. Well, tell us
And-
about that a little more, okay? Because a lot of students are really interested in that because clearly that's makes up so much of your subject matter, in the stories, and so.
Yeah.
How does that sort of factor?
It
in?
was, I lived there, we moved there when I was 9 years old, and I graduated from Shiprock High School, go Chieftains. And, I lived there, my father was a uranium mill worker, and that was a period across the reservations where uranium was making a lot of money, and so mining companies from outside the reservation leased land and came in and mined uranium. My father had started just as a shift worker in Durango, so they transferred all of those workers down to Shiprock. We lived in Shiprock during a really interesting time. We came in at a time when it was sort of an apartheid-like system operating on the reservations, when all of the teachers were white, children were punished for speaking their own language in schools, things like that. So the motive was to repress the native culture when we went to Shiprock. When we left there in 1972, upheaval had happened. There was revolution in the air. The American Indian movement had mobilized people. I took part in demonstrations. It was so there was really 9 years of really potent, interesting stuff going on the reservation. I never thought I would be a writer. Never, I had sort of a reservation education, and over, I would say, the next 10 years, I worked my way into writing based on conflicts that I had experienced on the reservation and wanting to find voice for them in fiction.
Right. Yeah, so many of your characters seem to express those conflicts exactly. And it occurred to me even at the time that the world that you were writing about was not a world that I read about very often in the New Yorker. And of course I grew up in northern Arizona.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in very much a Native American culture world, or sort of adjacent culture.
Right.
And so it was amazing to just read that, and of course now be able to share that, all these years later.
And I think that that's why I got the nod from the New Yorker. They were,
Really?
I don't think that there were, Louise Erdrich was publishing then, and of course, wonderful writers, Leslie Marmon Silko, writing about reservation life.
Right.
But it wasn't as, it was sort of a brand new thing at that point. I think that there are many more voices giving, our artists giving voice to that experience now.
So the Shiprock Fair was actually, which is the most recent story. was the first story we read together as a group, and the first story that we started talking about together, and an awful lot of interest and curiosity it sprang immediately. And I was wondering if you would mind reading us a passage from Shiprock Fair that a lot of students refer to often. It's about the mother of the central character, the point of view character, Willa. And I just wondered if you would mind reading a couple of paragraphs of that.
Sure, I would love to. So this story it takes place in the early autumn in Shiprock, outside Shiprock on the San Juan River.
Okay.
As my point of view character Willa is helping her father, who has a job collecting water samples from the San Juan River. But the backstory is that her mother died of tuberculosis a few years earlier, and she has had to take her mother's place with her father, because he's illiterate, and help him to do his work. And so there's some father-daughter strain here, because she's a teenager. She wants to be off doing teenage things, and she's got to work. She's got to work
Wants to be
with
at the
her
fair
dad.
with her friends.
With her friends, yeah. And she's also a very respectful young woman, so she doesn't overtly argue with her father, but she sort of passively expresses herself through silence and through irony and things like that. But her mother died of tuberculosis, and this is the passage that just sort of talks about her grief for her and her missing her mom, basically. Okay. She put her elbows on her knees and held her face. Far to the north, the bluff tapered down, and she could see the brown ribbon of river ahead. Her legs had begun to ache, so she sat back in the dirt. She picked more cattail fluff from the cuff of her shirt, then unfolded the arm that she had been holding out the window, and saw that her shirt was covered with cattail guts. It looked like a flurry of moths feeding on her. Perhaps her mother had opened her mouth and let the moths come in. They say Willa's mother went crazy before she died, that the fever went into her head, and they say that her father had gone out and shot the ground. Over and over again, he had shot the ground, trying to wake her mother up, or because he was angry, Willa didn't know. Willa had not been angry. She had not been anything. She could not remember what she was when her mother died, though now, sometimes, she missed her so much that the feeling would swim through her, and then it would be gone, like a dream.
Yeah. A really totally striking passage that like I say, we talk about a lot. And I'm just going to sort of paraphrase some questions that were similar, right, regarding this story and those characters, Willa and her father in particular. A lot of questions about that dynamic and sort of what was your intention as the writer was complexities you wish to sort of, show, because it does seem complex. I mean, Willa doesn't just she's just not an ornery teenager, that's not her singular dimension. She, like you say, has a number of different aspects to her personality and her attitude about her father. So a lot of my students are interested in, how do you get to the point where you feel like you understand what she's experiencing and thinking about her father? Do you refer to your own relationship, for example, with your own father, or friends that you had, when you were living in this area? Or, as one of my students said, do you just make it up? Does it come out of nowhere?
Well, for this particular story, I did not refer to my relationship with my own father. I referred to my relationship with my mother, who is the pattern for Willa's father in the story. My mother is a very dramatic, dynamic pistol of a person. And, and she had 6 kids, and she was the center of our lives. And we were always negotiating our territory her, with her at the center. It was hard for Mom to sort of take the passive role. You know, she was wily. She could, you know, even when, you know, she even when she knew that we might have a point in a certain argument or something, she would find a way to slip her out of it. So I think in my gut I needed to write about my mom, but my first choice as a writer was fiction. And I think it's because I was able to access some of these feelings and give expression to that wily character. Not directly through nonfiction, but through fiction.
Right.
But I think it's more complicated than that. It's so you go to the emotion that you know. You know that. But I also watched. You know, having grown up in Shiprock, I got to see children having a respectful relationship with parents. Mm-hmm. So
that's definitely part of the dimension we were talking about. That's definitely there.
Yeah. So that's, you know, I think I called on both those things, observing what I had seen, and then also, you know, my experience when I was a teenager. A man I knew used to go test the river water in, you know, get in a cage, and the cage was on a pulley, and he'd go out into the middle of the river and use these sample bottles to pull up the water. So that was something that always stuck with me as a setting.
Yes.
So to pull the land, the river, the job, and those, and my relationship with my mom and what I had served on the reservation, I think that's where that story got grabbed.
And that's a lot, right? I mean, it's a lot going on, a lot of synthesis going on there. Yeah. We also talk a lot, as you know, about, as a teacher yourself, of course, a lot about dialogue and just how we achieve the authentic you know, sense of dialogue happening, say, between a daughter and her father, a girl and her father. And how does one go about achieving, I mean, do you have to really desire a sense of authenticity? How do you find that ear, you know, that sort of represents something that's going to really come across as being authentic? Do you have any tips for us about that?
It's a little mysterious. For me, it's musical. It's you go with, I actually frequently get drawn into stories based on the sound of words coming together.
Right.
And, you know, my family was a musical family. We crossed the reservation singing. So I grew up with certain rhythms of song in my head.
Wow.
And I think that that's what gives me an ear for which dialogue you want to privilege and you want to make dramatic, and where you want to fold it into description or action and that sort of thing. But I write draft after draft after draft. It's not like I get it right the first time.
Right.
I mean, usually a story can take me 2 years. Bitterwater took me 2 years to write.
I hope you're listening, everybody.
But you know, Becky, since you brought up character and dialogue, so I so admire what you do with. I mean, I see you and I. We have a similarity in that we are drawn to like character actors. I think we can both slip into character and sort of become other people.
Yeah.
And what I admire about your poems so much is how highly dramatic they are and how you can unfold dialogue into stanzas, creating different voices, you know. So I was hoping you would read us a little something.
I will. I hadn't practiced.
Whoa.
I'll be honest with you. I mean, I really appreciate that you feel that way. I love dramatic monologue, and I love the performative aspect of presenting those poems.
Yeah.
That sort of survive and exist off the page, so to speak. You know, very differently than they exist on the page. So. Going into voice is very much sort of like being a character actor. It is like it's as much about acting as anything else. So the synthesis there of, and it is storytelling too. Dramatic monologue. A lot of those monologues are very narrative, and they're very much rooted in narrative in every way. Not just the characters that are speaking that I'm going into, but also some sort of sense of circumstance and location, situation, and and conflict usually.
Don't you think you have to go really deeply to go into character? I mean, what I admire is that when you go into character, you just seem to be really right there.
Yeah.
And I find that to be the huge draw to character-driven work, fiction or poetry, but also a real challenge. It's difficult. You have to give a lot to go that deeply into characters.
I agree. I do. I would not disagree. In fact, I get a little irritated. This is just a confession, probably not the most politically correct thing I can say, but I get a little irritated with poets that don't do that when they're presenting to an audience that's a rapt audience, it's a listening audience, and they're being asked to engage in this character, in this narrative scenario, and also to enjoy, as you say, the musical dynamics and aspects of the language. And so I kind of hate it when a performing poet or speaking poet, presenting poet, doesn't even try to do any of that. It's like weird,
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. And they do the poet thing,
Oh, yeah. I swear. We better not get started on all that.
But will you let us hear just a little sound of it?
Of course I'd be happy to.
I mean,
Just,
I picked out two, but maybe you have a favorite in here that you would prefer.
Of course, anything you like.
Do you want to give us a little bit about how the badass devil turns the? I love that.
Sure.
poem.
Yeah. That was that's one of Andrei Kudrowski's favorite poems. That was in Exquisite Corpse back in the day when we were writing, as young writers, and my I didn't submit anything to the New Yorker at all, but I did submit a lot to Exquisite Corpse, which is a really cool.
Oh, I love that.
It's a great magazine. It's been around for a long time.
Louisiana State, right? Baton Rouge, right?
Out of Baton Rouge,
Yeah.
And Andre was there for the longest time ever. And this is very strange. This is a really strange voice. It's a strange character. It's one of the more difficult to sort of pin down in terms of like, what is going on here? This person seems like they're either a little bit crazy or they're a little bit high or something. They're trying to make a point about the meaning of poems and other types of quote meaning, and so there's a lot of intended irony, I think, here that I'm just like letting this crazy character try to express. I mean, I'm taking the burden off of myself to even go there with like what the problem is. So this is called How the Badass Devil Turns the Light On. And what does that mean? I don't know. Nobody knows what that means, so don't worry about it. The hamburger of this narrative depends not on waxy yellow buildup, honey, nor doing your fucking homework on mescaline. And if you memorize caustic lime brushstrokes by telemarketed serial painkillers, you may as well just quit faxing me over for sex and knock off that benign earcock right now. No one gets rich on diameter. And who knows what that means? Nobody knows what that means. What the hell does that even mean? I don't know. I won't be cigarette to your hacking attention span. Now, two oxymoronic sorority sisters. The fat one's nippled knees are inverted, and the skinny one tosses, sheet-knotted, bilked, if you will, by Twinkies. Why? Yes. Now, Sunday, the creosote rumbles, picnickers fingering diapers. Ew. I always thought it would be cool to have the word ew in a poem.
I love it. And you talk about character voice. I'm just here. I'm with you. I hear it, yeah.
It's just really fun to say ew when reading a poem. Ew, but Genevieve understands God, tickling the face of the earth with his snakes. Lynn, confused, faces the toilet. Right-angled, alert, she sits young and amazed as wrens stuffed with succulents, staccato. Next, all the trees in the valley burn down. So this is like the speaker is kind of just going into this narrative mode. It's like here are the characters. They're these two sorority sisters, Genevieve and Lynn. Ew, what, Next, all the trees in the valley burn down. Okay. It was the pool boy. Her tears fart into the phone, but no, les metros et manque, baby. Silence is not golden, but guilt, naughty one, and don't let your cheetah high tops forget it. So that's just a passage from there. It's also kind of weird to read because I haven't even seen it in like 10 years.
I love it. I love it. I love that. Part of voice is the interesting, surprising word choice.
Back at you, yeah. Yeah, and interesting images as well. I think that are just kind of constructed at that moment for that moment.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily refer to something that the reader is expecting, which I think is something I like for my students to think. It's like, don't worry about what's expected of you. It's not, whatever it is. It just isn't.
Yeah.
So I think that we do have that in common as well. So back to you and Starburst, right? We were talking about that. It was our second story together as a group, and students had loads of questions about that story. It was very different in their minds, to their minds, than Shiprock Fair. And one of the questions is like really specific. I'll read the question, and then maybe you could read the passage that the student is referring to.
Okay.
Because she says, from Starburst, she says, and this is from Megan, the first paragraph right off the bat in Starburst caught my attention. I felt like I was placed in the middle of a scene and was simply observing what was happening within that scene, as well as being privy to the more intimate details about the people within, as it was unfolding. She has an exclamation point after that. As it was unfolding. Wow. This scene reminded me of what my dad and I used to do when my mom went shopping. People watch. We used to do nearly exactly what that scene conveyed. I was deeply impressed, and I longed to be able to write my own scenes that flow as smoothly as that one did. My question regarding this is, what is your method for conveying such a scene like that one? And would you have any advice on how to do that?
All right. Okay, well, I will read the opening paragraph here from Starburst. This is set in Laramie, Wyoming. Barry Deemer watches his wife Rosie across the deck. She's talking to Scott Wentworth while Scott grills ribs. The rhinestone barrette in Rosie's hair catches the sun and directs an oval ray onto the Wentworth's redwood siding. The ray seesaws over one chunk of boards. It's Janet Wentworth's barrette. A couple of weeks earlier, when Janet first noticed her missing barrette in Rosie Deemer's hair, she advised Barry to check into it. So, that story, this is a story that was inspired by sounds, by words and their compatible sounds. So I like the sense of a cop and a kleptomaniac. And so when I was sort of auditioning characters for this story, I had those two types in my head. But to answer the question, how did I come to start this story out with action and a scene, as if you're eavesdropping on something that is present right now? I really, when I was at Johns Hopkins, my teacher was John Barth, and he had us read all of Chekhov. And Chekhov's short stories and Chekhov's, his ideas about fiction and drama hugely influenced me as a short story writer. Wow. So Chekhov's whole thing was you put your audience into action. You create action from the very, very beginning, and you And story or drama begins when there is conflict. And there is conflict if you have a cop and a kleptomaniac married to each other. So in a nutshell, that's how I came up with that story. With the opening to that story. Now, setting, again, was really important to me. I was briefly a graduate student at the University of Wyoming, and I was house sitting for some people who lived in a much better neighborhood than I could afford. And they had a deck where I set this story. And there was also a bluff where you could see the beautiful Laramie Bluffs out behind their house. And I had met a cop in Laramie who was this gun-toting, so very different than I type of a person. He had like 21 guns or something stored away at various places in his house.
You don't have 21 guns?
I don't. I
can't believe that.
But, you know,
Wow.
and, you know, when I first met him, I thought, you know, I mean, that guy, I don't want to have anything to do with that guy. But I was developing as a writer, and I was at a place where I felt like if I don't understand somebody, what better way than to use fiction to begin to explore who they are. And so, you know, this was my first experiment writing from a male point of view and from an older man's point of view.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and a gun
How is that?
toting.
How is that? How does that work for you?
I tell you, it's so much easier for me to write from the male point of view than the female point. I definitely have the male character going on. So yeah, I got to explore that a whole lot more in my novel Yellow Cake, where I wrote from old men's points of view and young men's points of view and things like that. But I feel like it's again in writing. In trying to make believable characters, you have to go deeply and really try to imagine what it is to be in the skin of somebody else. Even though I believe you don't ever really get into the skin of anybody else. You're always in your own skin. It's just the imagination has to stretch and your own emotions have to stretch.
And spend some real time with that, right? I mean, I always refer to it as a type of meditation, transcendental even meditation, sort of being able to transcend one's self in order to become that character.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
While you're in it.
Exactly.
Yeah. That happens with, interestingly, I mean, this is a totally different subject, actually. That actually sort of happens, I think, with us, with memoirs in some ways, too, just sort of becoming another part of yourself, and kind of committing to that other self,
Have you written a memoir?
Yeah, and I teach it quite a bit.
You do?
Yeah, that's my main gig with MLS. Yeah, so
that is so cool.
Yeah,
because I am writing a memoir.
I know.
Now,
and you freaked up when you told me that, and I was like, in fact, that leads me into Gabrielle's question. Actually, she has several really good sort of general questions that echo the interest of many of us. She just a lot of us have asked really similar questions. So I'm going to kind of combine these two and see how you do with that. This cracks me. You've been writing for a very long time.
Very long, 25 years.
Are you ever afraid that one day you will run out of things to write about and that your imagination will stop working and that you will hit a block?